Assalamu alaikum qadirlik analar ve kızlar. Benim ismim Saltanat. Bugün Australian Uyghur Tanrıtağ Women's Association'ın teklifi bilen ballarını qanaq uyda o'qitish tecrübelerimni so'zlab beraman. Agar ruxsat bo'lsa, sizlarning savollaringlarni inglizcha javob bermoqchi. Hi everyone, my name is Saltanat. I have been teaching my 3 kids for the past 3 years at home. I've been homeschooling, and today I'm going to speak to you about homeschooling and more broadly how you can support your children's educational journey. So I think before this whole coronavirus isolation situation that we're all experiencing, homeschool was mostly and oftentimes kind of treated with a bit of suspicion, and it wasn't the norm. I think a lot of people look at homeschooling and they thought, first of all, well, how could anyone want to do that? We're trying to get our kids off to school so that we can get on with our lives as mothers. So just that self-sacrifice and that time that is required to homeschool, I think that can be very daunting for parents. The second thing is, do kids actually learn anything at home? And I guess the third most common thing that I get about homeschooling is, aren't your kids going to be socially awkward? And they're all legitimate questions. But I think that now that a lot of parents are forced to have their kids at home, they may start to see the benefit in it. And I think that, looking at the discussion on the internet and, with friends, for example, I think a lot of people are seeing the merits of homeschooling. And so that's what I'm kind of here to speak to you about today. I think... Yes, homeschooling is difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It requires a lot of self-sacrifice. It requires you to dedicate a lot of your time to planning and learning yourself, like learning the content yourself if you don't know it, especially if your kids are older. Researching, getting resources together, planning, scheduling, not to mention that you can have very little time for yourself if you don't have a lot of support. And it's definitely not something that you can do alone. You need the support of your partner or extended family. And yeah, if you don't have that and you don't have any time for yourself, you can go insane. Not to mention the way that kids can test you at home. They do that whether you homeschool or not, but when you're homeschooling, you're with them all the time. But over time and with experience and adjusting your view of education and how kids actually learn, it does get more manageable, and then it becomes more enjoyable, and then ultimately it's a very, very rewarding experience. So I want to start off by talking about how we currently view education, how the current system, views children and education, because I think that has a lot to do with understanding why some parents choose to homeschool. Okay, so if you send your kid to a mainstream school, you know that the current view of education is it's earlier is better. That's the first thing, right? So before they even get to preschool and kindergarten, they're encouraged to go to preschool prep schools, and learning how to read and write their names. These days a kid has to know how to write their name before they get into school. Back when I went to school, we learned that once we got to school. So, this earlier is better is kind of the mantra of education these days. And then once they're in school, the type of learning it's not particularly very imaginative. And I'm not saying that this is for every single school. This is obviously a generalization, right? That kids are expected to sit at their desks and listen to the teacher who stands at the front of the board. A lot of the work is worksheet based, it's textbook based. A lot of the kids, they're expected to fit into a particular mold of what an ideal student looks like, and usually that ideal student is academically strong. They can read early, they can do math addition and sums very, very early, and also there's the testing, right? So there's the quizzes. I think particularly if a child goes to a private independent school, there's a lot of testing that goes on, possibly every 2 weeks, major exams, grading from very early on. So your child is given a rank, first, second, third, even last from kindergarten or grade 1. And also standardized testing, right? Which is basically modeled on the American model, but something that Australia has really taken up. Okay, so also, all of these standards for what the ideal student should achieve by a particular age all of these things are created from a top-down level by people who write the curriculum, who work for the Board of Education. And if you look into it, most of it is actually not research. It's not backed by research. It's not backed by research about, how children develop emotionally, mentally, and academically as well. So that's kind of where we're at. Sorry, I'm going to cut in. If you don't mind, I've got some notes here. So if I'm looking away every now and then, please forgive me, but there's a lot of notes that I need to get through and the questions that I need to get through as well. All right, so where were we? We were at what education looks like. Generally, it's a high pressure environment where children are expected to conform to a particular mold of what a successful student looks like. Most of the time, the learning is not very creative. It's very traditional in the sense that it's books, textbooks, exams, assessments, computers from a very early age. Okay, so then the other side to that is, what in an ideal world, what would the education of the child look like? And I'm just going to read a quote by Rudolf Steiner, who says, "Our highest endeavor must be to develop the human beings who are able of themselves to impart purpose and direction to their lives. The need for imagination, a sense of truth, and a feeling of responsibility. These three forces are the very nerve of education." So I guess the three main points that we can take from there is that the end goal of education should be an adult who is filled with purpose, who knows their purpose in life, who is a critical thinker, and who can forge their own path in life. More than that, it's having that sense of civic responsibility to the world, to their family, to themselves. And to me, the most important part of that is having a deep sense of truth, recognizing truth for what it is. And how do we achieve this? How do we achieve such a lofty goal for education for our kids? Another quote loosely from Steiner is, take your child as the book. And I think that this is such a simple but incredible quote because, education is all about trying to balance two things, which is first, that education is developmentally appropriate. And secondly, that the teacher is a good example for the child to follow and learn from. Back in the early 20th century, teachers had certain moral guidelines that they had to fill to be allowed to be a teacher for students because, it was understood that the child would take so much from that teacher because they were a role model. It's not like that anymore. We don't have ethical and moral standards for teachers to tick off to be able to guide another generation of people, right? So just to expand on those 2 points, education in any sense, not just the academic, right? Because when I talk about education, I'm talking about it in a holistic sense, not just, books and school, because we're looking at the whole child here. So it should be academically appropriate. It should meet the child where they are in life, right? And I think the old saying, you can't run before you can walk is kind of relevant here. If the child is just not emotionally, developmentally, physically ready to learn a new skill, and that can be a physical skill, that can be, sorry guys. Okay, so that was just my son. He just popped into the room while I was doing this video. We'll just continue where we left off. Okay, so I was talking about meeting the child where they're at, right? If your child is not emotionally, physically, or, hasn't reached the maturity to learn a new skill, then you're going to struggle, right? And I think that applies to anything that you try to teach your child from birth onwards, right? It could be toilet training, it could be, weaning. All of these things, I find that if we try before the child is ready, it just becomes a huge struggle. But as soon as they're developmentally ready, it just becomes really easy. And this applies all throughout their lives, from birth all the way up to, 18 years old and possibly more, right? The idea here is that the child needs to fulfill certain criteria before they begin to learn how to read, before they begin to learn how to write, right? And I feel like these days we don't really know our children. We don't know what those developmental milestones are anymore. We don't even have a basic understanding how children develop, right? And that's really important to education in general because the education system is not modeled on the child, right? And that's a pretty profound realization to have, that schooling and education is not modeled around how the child develops and their emotional milestones and their physical milestones. So where do these standards come from? You know, where do the criteria for at what age children should be reading and writing, where does that come from? You know, what purposes does that serve? Whose purpose does that serve? I'm just going to leave that there. I'm not going to go into it any further. So I think continuing to talk about, you know, knowing our children and how our children develop, if we go back to our own tradition, you know, as Muslims, if we go back to our tradition, to what the Prophet ﷺ said about raising children, we can get a clear idea. We've got a guideline. We have a framework that is already in our own tradition, right? So the particular hadith that I'm referring to is when the Prophet ﷺ said that the child is the master for the 7 years, and then for the next 7 years they are the slave, and for the 7 years after they are, you know, the advised or the advisors. And, you know, what does this mean? I'll go into each of them. For the first 7 years, when it says that the child is the master, it means that their needs are all-consuming, right? And if you're a mother, you know this, okay? That we have to meet and be attentive to every single cry and need of the child, because the child can't do anything for themselves. It's a time for us to nurture that child into, you know, to grow into a human being, and they can't do that on their own. I think additional to this, it means that we play with our children, that we are playful with their children. That, you know, if you look at commentaries of the hadith, I'm not trying to give a commentary per se, I'm you know linking it to the education talk we're having, but if you read them, it does say that that this time period is really about being playful with your children. And if you know anything about learning through play, you know, and you want to back it up with research, well, there's a plethora of resources out there, right? So it's a playful time. It's a fun time. It's when the child, you know, needs to be nurtured. But does that mean that the child is not learning anything? Absolutely not. You know, the first 3 years and, you know, up to 7 years are absolutely crucial. The child is learning a lot, but how do they learn? You know, what is the way in which they learn? Is it direct instruction? Is it, you know, books? Is it sitting at a desk? No. I mean, some of that does come into it, but by and large, children at this age learn through imitation. You know, they're in what, you know, Maria Montessori would call the imitative phase, and they're just absorbing everything. You know, when they say like young children, they're like sponges, you know. So what is our responsibility as their parents? Our responsibility as their parents is to create a world for them that is worthy of imitation. And just backtracking a little bit, I think in the early years, from 0 to 7, it said that children are very close to their fitra, right? Which is their the purest state of being that you can be, you know, closest to Allah, essentially. You know, they just came out of the womb, you know, this place of purity, and their sense of fitra is much stronger than an adult's, right? Because they've just entered the world of dunya. So what is our responsibility as parents? You know, our responsibility as parents in this age is to kind of protect that fitra for as long as possible. You know, and how do we do that? We do that by being good examples for them. We do that by protecting them from harm. We do that by not exposing them to, you know, bad manners and bad speech and, you know, very vivid graphics and imagery through TV and, you know, iPads and devices. We protect and shield them from people who, you know, may not have, people who don't have the best values or the best manners. So the point that I'm really trying to make here is that the parent is the child's first teacher. And I think that, you know, these first years are really crucial in cementing the foundation of your relationship with your child. And, you know, developing a bond of love and of mutual respect, you know, where the parent, you know, respects the dignity of the child. And, you know, the parent will get that back from the child as well. So I think that considering that we know that these early years are about imitation, we have to make ourselves as their parents worthy of imitation. And something else that Steiner says is, you shouldn't be looking, as a teacher, you shouldn't be looking at what you're teaching, but who you are. And I think that's just so profound, and really something for us as parents to think about. So, if we want to be taken seriously as parents, if we want to have a good relationship with our kids, we need to show and model for our children the kind of behaviors that we want to see in them. We have to show them kindness. We have to show them mercy. We have to show them respect. We can't, and I think that in the ethnic context, there's a very different understanding of what parenting is. By and large, parents think that they control their children, that they own their children, that they have to be the disciplinarians, and there is a time for discipline, and I'm going to get to that, right? But the first 7 years, it's not about strict discipline. The first 7 years, as our Prophet ﷺ said, is that the child is the master. And the way that we can show our children how to behave is by modeling that for ourselves. So if we want them to be kind, we have to show them kindness. If we want them to be merciful, we have to show them mercy. And I think what's really key as well is that when we make a mistake, when we mess up, when we shout, when we get angry, when we get impatient, that we show them how to apologize. We are always, telling our kids, apologize, because, you've done the wrong thing. You've hurt someone. You snatched that off your brother or sister. You were shouting. And then we ask them to apologize. But if we haven't modeled for them how to apologize, then, why are they going to do it? So if we kind of go back to, just on the modeling thing as well, model for your children how to learn. Read books in front of them, read books to them. So going back to the second of the 7 years, it's a 3-year cycle. It's a 3-phase cycle, that our Prophet ﷺ was talking about. So the first one was 0 to 7, which is about imitation and play. And the second cycle from 7 to 14 is about discipline, and this is where the child needs to be taught. This is when formal academic learning should begin. This is when you send them to the madrasa, back in traditional Islam and learning, and also the discipline. This is where the discipline really starts to come in. So that's from 7 to 14. And that's also when formal writing and reading, recognition and writing of the letters, of alphabet, of math, of addition, all of these things start from 7. So then once they get to 14, the last phase in this 3-stage cycle is to befriend your kids, right? To advise them. I do think that in our current context, that children may not have the maturity that children had in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. 14-year-olds were very different, in those times than they are now. And, our 14-year-olds have struggles that are unique and that are potentially a lot more challenging. And I think that second cycle may actually be longer. That's just my sense, and I think I've also heard scholars say this before as well. But by and large, there is a time, guys, when you become your child's friend, when your role is to advise them, right? This is healthy. This is a healthy trajectory of parenting, and if we go all the way back to the quote that I read from Rudolf Steiner about what education is, the end goal of education is not to create, a child adult, or an adult who is childlike, who still has no purpose in life, who is still dependent on you as the parent to guide them, on how to think, and is listless in life, right? And I think that this fits in with our own philosophy of parenting, that we do not own our children, right? They do not belong to us. We all belong to Allah. And our job here is merely as facilitators, that we try to nurture and guide them to have a self-sufficient life, right? And I don't want my kids to be dependent on me forever. I can't do this forever. I need they need to go and fly off and do their own thing at some point, and that really is the ultimate goal. And I think I'm trying to link this into, how to, get yourself to be taken seriously as a parent, which, by the way, was one of the questions, is that it requires groundwork. It takes time, and a lot of it is imitation and modeling based. In saying that, if you already have children who are out of the first 7-year, cycle, and they're over 7 years old, and maybe they're even teenagers, and you're like, well, I haven't done this, I haven't done that. I wish I could go back and do things differently. It's too late for them now, they're teenagers. I would advise that, look, it's never too late. It is never too late to work on your relationship with your child. It might take a lot harder work. It might take more time. It might be more challenging. But, you take the steps forward first as the parent, not the child, right? You're still responsible for your children, whether they're 7, 5, or 14 or 16, right? And so I think if you want to start taking these steps, I think the first thing that you should do is understand where your child is at developmentally. And as you can tell, I am a big proponent of the Waldorf-Steiner philosophy, which I can get into, inshallah, another time. But they do have a lot of writings about child development and phases. And by the way, they also follow the 7-year cycle phases as well. And within that, they have lots of writings about how children change throughout those 7-year cycles. So I think understanding where your child is at and looking at emotionally, what are they going through? Physically, like puberty, they might be going through puberty. A lot happens around that time. Understanding where your child is at physically, emotionally, and mentally will help to guide what kind of parenting tactic and strategy you're going to take with them. But remember, the key is in connection, right? Nurturing your connection with your child, and modeling. Just model good behavior for them, model good manners for them. And that will lead us on to our second topic, which is about, how do we keep our children engaged in learning? Okay, so there is a writer, her name is Julie Bogart. She has homeschooled 5 of her children, and they're all adults now. And she has created a program called The Brave Learner. And she speaks of following the child's passions, to retain their interest. And I think that that is just the best advice, because if you're forcing your child to do something that they're just not interested in, you're not going to be able to keep them engaged. In saying that, obviously some things have to come from top down. Some things just have to be done. Math is not going to be exciting and interesting all the time. Dictation work isn't going to always be interesting. Writing their narratives and doing their homework isn't always going to be exciting. But I think alongside those things, if you are feeding their passions and their interests, then it becomes tolerable. So what do I mean by following their passions and their interests? Well, if your child loves horses, right? If your child loves, programming, if they love video games even, hopefully those kids who are into video games are older in age and not too young. But you should take the time to speak to your child, observe your child. What are they interested in? And kids always go through phases, right? They're into horses one day, they're into, obsessed with learning how to play the guitar. They might be into fashion. They might be into, making videos, using their iPhones to make videos, if you allow your child to have an iPhone. What are they interested in? Start from there. Okay. Learn about it with them, read books on it, like go crazy, right? Go to museums, go to farms, if they're interested in horses, go to the zoo if they're interested in animals. Really take it to the nth degree in trying to feed their passions for this particular topic, right? And then what you can do is, once you've tried to kind of fully absorb the child in that subject area, use it as a platform to do math. If the child is reading about the topic, there's your English. Get them to write a narrative about it. Get them to write, a recount about it, or incorporate counting, incorporate some kind of math through it. Just make sure that it's a hands-on experience where the child is allowed to be fully absorbed in this area of interest, because then they will be engaged, right? And I think that's the other thing about mainstream schooling, is that it can't follow every child's interest. I have a teaching background, right? It would be impossible to follow 30 children's interests in one classroom. The teacher would not be able to do that. And I guess that's one of the benefits of homeschooling, is that you're able to follow the interest of your child and fully absorb yourself into it. Okay, so I'll just give you a couple of rules to keep your kids engaged, okay? The number one thing in keeping your child engaged in something is you. It's your own energy, right? Children pick up on our energies. And if we feel frustrated and impatient and disengaged, like if your child comes up to you and they're like, oh, we found out this amazing fact about something, and you're looking at your phone, or you're distracted, or you're just generally tired and frustrated and stuff like that, and you're not giving them your full attention, then, that's going to dissipate. They're going to be like, oh, maybe this interest of mine isn't important. And, maybe something that could have become amazing for them just didn't. And when you're engaging in the topic that they're interested in, show them that you're interested and excited about it as well, especially if your children are much younger. I would say even the 7 to 9-year-old really wants to move. In fact, they especially want to get up and move. So, give them breaks to run outside, set up obstacle courses in the backyard where they can run and jump and, climb over things. Incorporate movement into your learning. So, get them on the trampoline, and as they jump, get them to, recite their times tables. Clapping, things like this can help break up the monotony of sitting down and, keep them interested. And I think the last thing really, when we're talking about engagement in learning, is additional to this, is knowing that learning is everywhere. Learning it can be hands-on, and learning can happen organically. And I think that is some of the best learning. And I'm going to tie this into the question about, how do we supplement our children's education, even if they do go to school. I think part of it is knowing that children, can learn from anywhere and from anything. Learning doesn't just happen in a classroom. In fact, most learning that is permanent and the most important learning happens outside of the classroom. So what do I mean? Well, I would encourage you to encourage your children to get into the kitchen and cook with you, because especially with something like baking, baking bread, something so simple can teach a child math, in terms of fractions and halves and weighing and measuring. It's science-based because they're basically conducting an experiment where they're putting in all these different elements and they're looking at it come together as dough. Literally just being in the kitchen can do so much for a child's learning. Get them to wash the vegetables, sort them, especially for younger children, get them to identify colors, oh, what color is this apple? But what color is that apple? How many apples do we have here? Oh, there's 4 of us in this family and there's 8 apples. How many can we eat each? Worded problems like this while you're cooking, and just get them to think about it. And they won't even know that it's math, and therefore they will be engaged. They will feel like they're contributing, they're helping, they're doing something, a responsibility in the family, in the home, they're contributing to that. And they don't even realize that they're learning as they do it. Even with cleaning, when you go shopping, encourage them to handle the cash, even though we don't use cash anymore. There's actually benefit in having children handle money and learning, simple transactions. Knitting, if you knit, if you're a mother who knits, even if you're a mother who doesn't knit, I don't know how to knit, I offload that to my mum. If your kids learn how to knit, that's your math solved for you. Sequencing, things like that. Learning a musical instrument, piano particularly, is very good at, developing a child's sense of logic, and also mathematics, because there's beats per minute and rhythm. So I think the attitude to have here to keeping your child engaged, supplementing their education at home, which I'll go into further, is really adjusting your mindset, right? Education and learning doesn't just happen in the classroom, it happens in life, it happens everywhere. And if you think back to your own learning experiences, I think that you'll find that you learn a lot of things outside of school that are probably more beneficial for you as well. That's not to say that school is not important, it just means that don't think that learning has to just happen at school. Okay, some other, activities to kind of supplement your child's learning outside of school, I would say get them outside, okay? This will also, help them stay engaged, but get your kids outside, allow them to go to the park. If they have older siblings, let them go by themselves, get them moving, get them running, get them climbing, get them jumping, get them doing the monkey bars. And do it together as a family, go on bushwalks. We live in Australia, we have a beautiful, bushland, habitat here that you can take advantage of. Get them to collect natural specimens on their walk. Take a book and identify things, make that a monthly thing. Do it in summer and in winter so that they can feel the different temperatures and the different, the change in the climate and the weather. So yes, get them outside. The second thing is read. Read. I can't emphasize reading enough. If you want a culture of reading in your house, your kids need to see you reading. And not just reading to them, but see you reading a book, not your phones, not an iBook, not a Kindle, an actual physical book. They need to see that, if my parent is telling me that books are important and they're forcing me to read these books, they're not going to do it if they don't see their parents reading. And additional to that, and this is really, really important, right? It's not enough to just read the book. You need to discuss it with them. Yep, you need to discuss what they have read. Even with very young children, you should, just ask them basic questions about the book, because what is this going to do? It's going to improve their comprehension skills, and it's going to develop a rhetoric between you and your child, and it's going to develop their language skills, So read and discuss what you've read, and keep that, carve out a time to do that reading. It might be just before bedtime. It might be when they just come back from school. Maybe that's the downtime, quiet reading time. Have a quick discussion about it after, And just on that point about, setting aside time, schedule, routine, have some kind of a family rhythm where, during the week there are days that are dedicated to certain family tasks and activities. You can have a games night. Pull out your board games, or play simple games, kort. You guys play kort, Eurotje, Euros play kort, so that's math. Other games can teach strategy. There's Monopoly, there you go, there's math, there's bingo games, like animal bingo games that will teach them to identify, animals. There are word games, Scrabble, general knowledge games. Our children need to have general knowledge about the world, because they live in the world. So, have a family rhythm where you slot in times to go for family bushwalks, camping if you can. But while you're there and while you're doing it, be present. And you don't need to necessarily prepare for these things in advance, but just have those conversations. Oh, look at that tree. How is it different from the tree next to it? What's different about it? It's just understanding that thing that I said before about organic learning. Okay, I'm going to move along. So there were some questions about virtual learning and maintaining a child's interest, while they're learning online. I'm going to be completely honest with you and tell you my stance about virtual learning. I think that it's unnecessary, and I think that our children shouldn't be expected to learn virtually. How long has it been since schools were locked down? A month? Is a month break from learning going to seriously harm your child's academic development in the scale of their whole lives? I don't think so. I think schools should have just given them a break. Why force kids? I'm hearing about private schools forcing kids to log in every single day and be expected to, I mean, they have their recess and lunch breaks, but literally sit in front of the computer for 6 hours from, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Have their recess and lunch breaks, but come back. That's so damaging in so many ways to your child. First of all, that they're sitting for that long. We know how unhealthy sitting is, right? And having a young child or any child of any age sitting for that long is unhealthy. Staring at a screen, what's that doing to their eyes? What's that doing? Their brain's going to turn into mush by the end of that. So, I'm I'm going to be a bit rebellious and say to you as parents, question it. Tell the teachers at school that you don't want this for your children, and if you're the kind of parent who is very concerned about their academic development, ask for worksheets. Tell the schools to send out worksheets, and then have a once a week, a Zoom session with the teacher to just check in on their work. It doesn't have to be every single day. But if you can't, if there's no way of getting around it at all, allow your child to take lots of breaks, more than the school recommends. Don't just keep it to recess and lunch. Allow them to have more breaks and get them outside during those breaks, right? And second of all, if they're doing school online, they shouldn't be having extra screen time, especially during the week. Maybe on the weekends, they can watch TV and have time on their iPads. But during the week, when they're already spending that many hours, doing online learning, they shouldn't be looking at a screen after that at all. And second, and also don't pressure them. I would say that just take a more relaxed approach. We live in turbulent times. And as an adult, I wouldn't be able to do that. So why are we expecting our children to do that? Okay, I think the other part of that particular question was, how do you balance a child who's doing online learning and you're working from home? Or you have to go to work and you have to leave your kids at home. How do you monitor them? How do you deal with that? I think the first thing I'll address is that if you have to work from home and your kid has to do online learning, you need to schedule things. You need to schedule the time where you do your work, and you need to schedule in time where they do their schooling. If both parents are at home, swap. If you can have the child sitting next to you and doing the work, and they have the teacher, online, then I guess that's manageable. So I would just say try to establish a clear schedule where you're not clashing with each other, and you can work it out. With the second question, where you have to go to work and leave your child at home to do online work, honestly, I don't have a solution for that. That's a really, really tough situation to be in. And I think that there needs to be a firm amount of trust between you and your child. But in the end, let's face it, they're just kids. You leave them at home on the computer. I don't know, how much work are they going to get done? The computer itself is a very distracting force. They can just go straight onto the internet. They can open up tabs and go onto YouTube. They can pretend that they're present in that virtual classroom, but be looking at their iPads. And that's why I say it's such a dangerous thing, and it's so unnecessary, to have them doing these online classes just so that they don't fall behind, So I'm so sorry, I don't have a solution for that conundrum, and I do hope that, things just ease soon and you can send them back to school. Okay, all right, I think the last question was about, how do you support your child's education when you do not, you were not educated in Australia? And yeah, it's a legitimate concern, and I definitely sympathize with you. But I would take from the example of my mother. When I was in early primary school, my mother, who was not educated in Australia, had minimal amount of English. She used to get me to, she gave me my own notebook, and she would get simple children's storybooks, and she would get me to copy them out. She was literally getting me to do copy work, which is a major thing, right? She didn't know what she was doing. She was working off instinct. And I think, I haven't made this point, but it's so important to tap into your instinct, right? As a parent. But, she would get me to just copy out these very simple books, and it would improve my handwriting. It would improve my reading. It would help me to understand, to look at to kind of absorb grammatical rules without really knowing what they were. So that's something that you can do. Or the lesson to get from that, I guess, is that just keep it simple. Don't complicate things, because you don't understand their very difficult algebra text, right? Just try to keep things simple. For example, while they're doing their homework, if you have time and, dinner's prepared or someone else is doing dinner, read your own book just sitting next to them. Just be around them. You may not be able to answer their homework questions, but just having you next to them will make them feel like they're not alone in their learning. If they are interested in a particular topic, like I was saying before, that they're interested in, learn about it in Uruche. Ask them, what topic you're interested in. What are you learning at school right now? Do a bit of research into it in your own language and have conversations with them about it in Uruche. It will do wonders for their language development, and they're still learning about the topic. And take them to museums, take them to exhibitions, watch documentaries together, and get them to teach you what they're learning, right? So in Uruche or in English, it'll help you improve your English. If they're learning something at school, sit down with them and say, can you teach me what you learned at school today? I'll be your student today. God, they will love that. They will love being your teacher, right? And so those are some of the ways that you can help support your child's education without even going to tutors, and I would say that a tutor is something that you can look into when your child is like high school. I wouldn't really recommend it for primary school. But yeah, those are just some of the ways. And I think most importantly, be connected to your child. Nurture your connections with your child, have conversations with them. And it doesn't just have to be about school and education, but just about life, about yourself. Kids love hearing stories about their parents when they were kids. Tell them stories about yourself. So connection is really important. I think I've addressed all of the questions, and if I haven't and I've forgotten some, please do forgive me. Forgive me for the English, but it's just a topic that I don't have the vocabulary for in Uruche, unfortunately. Maybe one day I will if I, take up the learning of it more seriously. I think the last comments that I'll leave you with is, your child's education is, yes, it's a very long journey. It can seem very challenging, but you may have done things wrong in the past, but that's okay, because every day is a new day and there's always an opportunity to do things right, or to do things from the start, all over again. See every day as an opportunity to do that. Just a few concluding remarks. When we think about the education of our children, you need to have the end goal for your child in mind. What do you want your child to ultimately be successful in? How do you define success? Is it just getting them into the best job possible? Is it just getting them into university, getting a very high result at school? Or is it more than that? Is it something that's more holistic? That is something that you need to decide for yourself with your husband, write it down. And then once you have that end goal in mind, you can take the steps to work towards that end goal. There is a book called Positive Parenting in the Muslim Home. I can't remember the authors, but that is the title. And it's a fantastic book on how to kind of incorporate positive parenting methods at home with the Islamic element as well. So I would recommend that. So establish an end goal for what you want for your children. Secondly, know that connection is key. Nurturing your connection with your children through conversation, discussion, shared experiences together, modeling good behavior for them. All of those things will really carry you through the pitfalls and the good moments of schooling. The third thing is, if you're considering homeschooling, for whatever reason, your child might be struggling at school, he or she might be getting bullied, you may just not be happy with the schooling system and want to try something different. If you do choose to take that path, the best way to approach it is with flexibility. If you go in with too many concrete or set ideas, you will ultimately fail and then feel down on yourself, you know. The initial phase of homeschooling is turbulent, it's difficult because you're trying to, you know, manage so much, you know, home, cooking, cleaning, if you're still working, work, trying to come up with a curriculum for your child, you know, sourcing resources. It's overwhelming, and sometimes it will feel like you're drowning at the start. But reach out to other homeschooling groups for support and advice. Reach out to other homeschooling mothers. I myself, I'm on Instagram. It's at _modest_life, where you can send me a message, and I do share my own homeschooling journey on there. But over time, it will get easier as you gain experience, just like with anything else. So don't be afraid if you're really feeling this, you know, this urge to homeschool. Just look into it. You know, you won't lose anything. And lastly, you know, as you know, it is the month of Ramadan, and I guess, you know, we are all Muslims here. You know, we want to raise our children to, you know, be mindful, conscious, you know, God-fearing people who recognize the truth, right? And I think that given that sometimes community can be difficult these days, or we have so many challenges facing us that our parents didn't face when they were raising us, it can feel overwhelming. And I think that organizations like the Australian Saltanat Women's Association are fantastic, because they can be, you know, support groups to discuss things like this, and to even to just be an ear to listen to, you know, women's issues and even children's issues and things like that, and to advise each other and to lean on. But I think support is very important, having community is very important, but most of all, it's knowing who you are, what your values are, and just striving, right? There is no perfect end result. There is no perfect parent or parenting method or parenting. We just try our best, you know. And I think that our children are very forgiving, and they love to remember the beautiful things about their parents. So if we can just facilitate that nurturing, beautiful, consistent home where us as parents are good role models for them, and we show them that we sincerely care for them, I think that, you know, we can't go very wrong. So thank you so much for joining me on this talk, and I want to thank the Australian Saltanat Women's Association for inviting me to give this talk. Please forgive me if I said anything to hurt or upset you or offend you. Believe me, it was not intended. And if you would like to continue this discussion with me further, like I said, just reach out to me on Instagram. Assalamu alaikum.